All right, we are streaming live on Facebook even now. It is great to see all of you. I think we have a few people who are going to be giving little book reports tonight, but I only see one, so might be shorter than we thought, but I still got a bunch of them, so it'll be okay. Great to have everybody. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for once again me getting to hang out with my friends, family, and talking about this text that I love so much, and about you, who we all love very much too. I ask that you'd help us to see you clearly in the scriptures and also in the rest of the world, even in these other things that aren't in our scriptures. Today, maybe we have a little bit of fun. That would be nice too. And have our eyes open to more and more things that reveal you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about the Pseudepigrapha. You can say it with me. No, don't say it on Zoom. It's not going to work. It'll be a mess. Yeah, just say it to yourself. Pseudepigrapha, which just has the word false, pseudo, and grapha in there, which is the writings. They're not false writings. That doesn't mean that. It just means that people don't think that they're from the people that they say they're from, and that they are ones that universally were kept out of the Hebrew Bible, and so were universally also kept out of the Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox Bible. That's true all except for one, which we will talk about today too, a particular psalm we're going to get to read, which is in the Orthodox Bible, but not in ours. So let's go. I want to make sure that those people who did their book reports get to give them. So I don't want to start, but if you've been here for a while, you know we've been just kind of working through some of these apocryphal and pseudepigraphical books, and this is going to be the last week for it. And then we're going to jump into New Testament stuff for a couple of weeks, and then translations is my plan after that, just to talk for a week about what about your translation, like your translation, your English translation, because most of you aren't trying to figure out whether you read the Masoretic text or the Greek Septuagint or the Latin Vulgate. You want to know, can I read the NIV, the RSV, or the ESV? Which one's the best? So we'll talk about that stuff too in a few weeks. But right now, let's jump into the Pseudepigrapha. If you have chosen one of those and you are ready to talk about it for a few minutes, let me know right now and go for it. Nobody.
I've got 3 and 4 Maccabees, if you want.
All right, Jay, take it away, my friend. Third and fourth Maccabees.
3 Maccabees, written between, say, 150 BCE in Greek, probably written in Alexandria. It's a story of persecution of Jews living in Egypt during the reign of Ptolemy the fourth Philopater, who reigned from 222 to 205 BCE. So it's actually takes place, 50 or so years, 50, 60 years before the events of the other books of the Maccabees, the other histories.
Okay.
So after defeating Antiochus III, who was the emperor of the Seleucid Empire in Syria, basically, at the Battle of Raphia at 217 BCE, Ptolemy visited Jerusalem, but was prevented from entering the Holy of Holies at the temple. He was enraged, and he returned to Alexandria, and he orders that all the Jews to be registered and enslaved. Those who abandoned their faith or even kind of joined the cult of Bacchus, would be treated better. But the ones who were to stay faithful to their God were to be rounded up and put to death in the arena by being trampled by 500 intoxicated elephants.
That's some specifics. Wow.
Yeah. So the execution is thwarted a couple of times, and finally, after an impassioned prayer from an elderly scribe named Eleazar, God opens the doors of heaven, sends two angels who protect the Jews and cause the elephants to turn around and trample the Egyptian army that's been following them. Okay, so Ptolemy sees the error of his ways and basically lets the Jews go free. He sends a letter kind of rescinding his prior orders and giving the Jews the freedom to go. And then I don't see Michael on the Zoom, but I did print out an excerpt from this point of Maccabees that I can read.
Yeah, go.
If you want. So this is from chapter 3. So, but the Jews, having received this epistle, that's the letter from Ptolemy, did not immediately hasten to begin their journey, but petitioned the king that those of the Jewish race who had voluntarily transgressed against the holy God and the law of God might meet through them such punishment as they had deserved, alleging that they who had transgressed the divine commands for their belly's sake would never be well affected even to the king's affairs. He then, Ptolemy, admitted what they said to be true, and approving it, gave them full liberty to destroy those who had transgressed the law of God in every place within his kingdom, and this with all freedom, without any further authority or inspection from the king. Hereupon, having paid him their acknowledgments as was fit, their priests and all the multitude, singing loud the Alleluia, departed with joy. And whenever they met with any one of their countrymen who had been polluted, they punished him upon the spot and slew him with marks of public ignominy. And on that day they slew above 300 men and passed it as a festival with joy, having mastered and punished the profane. But they themselves who had adhered to God unto death, having had full enjoyment of their deliverance, departed from the city crowned with garlands of all sorts of most fragrant flowers, with joy and shouting, giving thanks and praises and most melodious hymns to the eternal God of their fathers, the Savior of Israel.
Very cool. That's
Yeah.
good stuff.
So, okay. So, this was not considered a reliable history, more of a fable. No Jewish writers appear to reference it. It was not included in the Vulgate. It is considered deuterocanonical by the Eastern Orthodox and other Oriental Orthodox churches.
I wonder what convinced them that it was a fable. Probably the drunken elephants part.
I don't know.
Just to imagine it. I'm just imagining 500 drunk elephants and what it took to get them drunk, because that's a big animal. Like, I don't think just having one shot is going to do them in. I think they're going to need to have several bottles of tequila to get each one.
Well,
So
they talked about, you know, the undiluted wine to give to the elephants and all. So, and they had to get them drunk, you know, like 3 or 4 times because
they got sober real quick. Yeah.
No, because, you know, like you said, there were various attempts to have the stampede, but
right.
It kept getting thwarted for various reasons. So.
Yeah, and I guess I guess you have to have them drunk or else they won't crush people, maybe.
Well,
Like, I
I
would
don't
think you
know.
could just stampede them regardless of whether they're drunk or not, but what do I know?
I would think that would be the function of the war elephants, which obviously these were.
Shows how
So,
much we know about training elephants,
yeah.
not our area of expertise. All right, I'm gonna remember that story for a while. That is pretty awesome.
Okay.
All right, where does 4 Maccabees go?
Well, okay, so I was able to find kind of an online and read 3 Maccabees, but I couldn't find 4 Maccabees. So this is basically from Wikipedia. So 4 Maccabees was probably written 20 to 130 Common Era in Greek, and either Alexandria or Antioch. The original title may have been On the Sovereignty of Reason, and it's a philosophic discourse praising the supremacy of pious reason over passion. And what it does is it for a large part it expands some of the martyrdom stories from 2 Maccabees. There was the woman with the 7 sons, which is notable, and also the scribe Eleazar, who some people think may have been the same Eleazar from 2 Maccabees. So the martyrs will be rewarded in the afterlife. Therefore, it's rational to accept death by torture. Had little influence on Judaism. It was admired by Christians who were interested in stories of martyrdom. The church councils were skeptical of the book, not included in the Vulgate. And it was more popular among the Greek-speaking churches, but it was never considered part of the canon or the Deuterocanon.
Huh. It's not that long. It's only, looks like only 18 chapters. And yeah, it starts off, just to give you a little clip, as I'm going to demonstrate a most philosophical proposition, namely that religious reasoning is absolute master of the passions. I would willingly advise you to give the utmost heed to philosophy. And then he goes into exactly what you said, a reasoned approach to reason and why you should accept his rationality for martyrdom. So that's great. Cool. Looks like they used to think that it was by Josephus, but most people say it couldn't have been.
Right.
So, very cool. All right. That's 4th Maccabees, 3rd and 4th Maccabees. Thank you, Jay. All right. Who else is in this? Who's got a text they want to tell us about? I know that my dad had one, but he's dealing with some other stuff right now, so he probably won't be here. Travis, you had a few, didn't you?
I've got the bronze scroll.
Oh, yes.
Also known as the copper scroll or something along those lines. It was the only text, or one of the few texts not written on paper or a form of paper. It's actually on bronze. And it's a really weird one. Written around the same sort of time period we're talking about, within the 1st century. And it's basically a bunch of locations of where treasure is. It's like the Lara Croft scroll of the Bible. So
Sweet.
It lays out where all the hidden treasures and things were. And so that, at least that's the idea. And so there's a bunch of locations and different descriptions of treasures and things to be found. And yeah, so it's a totally, there's not a lot of, I guess there's text, but there's not narrative. It's basically just a bunch of locations and descriptions of treasure. So
who wrote it? And treasures of who?
Treasures of the Jewish people.
Oh, okay.
Who wrote it? I don't know. Let me do some quick on the fly. This is my D- presentation. Well,
we don't really know who wrote them. I was just saying, did it come from like a sectarian group? Did we think that they think it come from that? Like, I would guess it probably isn't going to give you an answer. Not a quick, easy
Yeah,
one.
I don't recall it giving an author at all, or even like a guess, but it's basically like this is the long lost treasure of the Jewish people. That would have been like, the idea is that they would have hid their treasure in these locations to protect it from like the Romans taking it. Or
Is
other
this
people.
considered a Dead Sea Scroll?
Yes, it was in the caves at Qumran. It's in with the Dead Sea Scrolls. So
Very-
one of the potential authors is the Nicenes
Essenes.
Essenes, excuse me, not Nicenes.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
And there's a pretty good chance that would be, that those were some of the ones that weren't scriptural texts. So they're right alongside them. So the Essenes may have brought them along. And I'm guessing there's not copies of that. There's just one copy, probably, if it's made out of copper.
yeah, and it was really hard to read. They couldn't decipher. It was one of the last ones to figure out. They had to like send it off to a lab for them to cut it up because they couldn't unscroll it without like
Right.
totally obliterating the scroll, because it's like metal leaf. And so they had to chop it into tiny little sections and then scan it to figure out what exactly it said. So.
Wow. I can see we could make a movie about this that would look very similar to either Lara Croft or a National Treasure.
Well, cutting it up and then like a computer scanning it with some sort of thing. And then like, here's what it says. And here's the blanks that get filled in. And then she goes and finds the treasures. But some people got to those locations first. And so then we had to go to this place where those people took the stuff.
Yes. All right. I'm
Totally.
in. I will be the actor. I'll do the Nicolas Cage part if anybody else wants to fund it and do the camera work and create the story. So I'm in. All right, that's awesome.
And then I think originally I had volunteered for like a fourth one and I couldn't locate which one it was. So sorry.
I think you were going to do the War Scroll.
We did that one last week.
Oh, okay. What about Sibylline Oracles? Somebody was going to do the Sibylline Oracles. I remember that.
Maybe that's the one that I volunteered for and I forgot about.
That's me.
Oh,
I
good.
thought we
David's
talked
got
about that.
Yeah.
Sweet.
I just like sat down like 5 minutes ago. I was listening in the car. So I'm almost back up and ready to go, but I'm not quite there yet. So
I got plenty.
Anyone wants to stall.
I'll jump in and do one or two and then jump back to you.
I'll be ready by then.
That's fine. All right. So let's see here. I can't remember which ones I've told you about. I don't think I mentioned the martyrdom of Isaiah, which is a great story and super fun. So Isaiah, they think this is written after Christ. So it's in the generation or two after Jesus, somewhere between 75 and 150 or so. And they think, so the copies that we have rather, so some of the originals we think may have been pre-Christian Jewish copies, and then they became Christian. So that's part of the problem when you're looking at some of these things, is that they might have been a story and then Christians got a hold of them and edited them, right? Which is what happens in Old Testament texts as well, right? There are Psalms that are written to Baal, and then Jewish people got a hold of these Psalms, and Yahweh makes a shift from being kind of a fertility deity to being more of a storm god in their mind, and they kind of take out the words Baal and they put in the name Hashem, Yahweh. They put in that name in there instead. And you can tell that often because like the cadence of the psalm doesn't work the way it is, which is very cool. And we also have copies of things where the verses look very similar to the same kind of praise that Baal gets. The Yahweh gets. So this one started off probably as a Jewish text. Christians came in and changed it, like they changed Halloween, like they changed Christmas, whatever you want to think about all those things. So they're changing this one. Would they think maybe because it's been changed so late, maybe as late as the 150s, that it might have some Gnostic influences? I didn't study it too hard to figure out whether they're right or not, and I'm not a Gnostic scholar, so I wouldn't know even if I studied it hard. So in 2 Kings 21, there's a passage there where Isaiah is talking, Isaiah the prophet that you all know, is talking to Hezekiah the king. There's a large part where Hezekiah is sick and all that stuff in the book of Isaiah. And he says to him that Manasseh, his son, Hezekiah's son, is going to be a disaster, isn't going to follow the Lord. So this is that little text expanded. So it's telling this story about this vision that Isaiah has of Manasseh not following God and messing up the whole country. And if you'll remember, Manasseh is one of the reasons why in Chronicles they condemn, like it's one of the reasons that they go into exile. Like all these things happen under Manasseh. Manasseh is kind of this bad
Hey,
guy.
Jace,
Yes, sir.
I thought that
Yes, sir.
after Hezekiah was sick on that occasion, he reigned for 20 more years. And then Manasseh was 15 when he became king.
You are probably right. I can't remember the
So-
chronology, but that doesn't
so-
disagree with anything.
So, I mean, what always struck me was the fact that, Hezekiah lived an additional 20 years, but the evil king's son Manasseh was born during that, that second period.
Yeah. Yeah. And still evil. Yeah. Which you'd think Hezekiah would have done a better job since God saved him and all that stuff. Yeah. But whatever. Yeah. So Manasseh's not going to follow God. And that's the prophecy that Isaiah gives. And Belkira is one of the other people in here, the bad guy in this text. And Belkira is possessed by the spirit of Belial or Beliar, depending on which texts you get, which is the same creature as Samael in some of the texts, or Satan in ours, after we get later, right? This is the adversary, possesses him, and he accuses Isaiah of treason, and this is the martyrdom. Isaiah hides in a tree, they find him, they cut him in two with a saw. Okay, so that's the big picture story. Chapters 1 through 5 are about that, and you get the death there in that scene. And then chapters 6 through 11, the rest of the story is kind of going back and saying what the prophecy was, throwing in some other things. So chapter 4 has all this stuff about Jesus in it, tons of stuff about Jesus. It's just filled with this Christ being crucified. It mentions the texts that are scriptural. It includes the Psalms, the Proverbs, the Asaph and Ethan and Korah music people. So these are just more Psalms. It includes the words of Amoz, which is Isaiah's father. It has 6 of the 12 prophets that we have in our scriptures, and then Joseph the Just and Daniel. So we have, he's kind of saying what the canon is at this point in time, as they understood it. So the middle section, which they call the Testament of Hezekiah, describes a vision of Jesus coming. It talks about the corruption of the Christian church, the rule of Beliar, and the second coming when Jesus comes back. Very apocalyptic. Even talks about Nero as the Antichrist. So it's probably read some of the book of Revelation or living in the same stream as the apocalypse that we know of John. Chapter 9, chapter 10 tell the story of Jesus coming to earth and how he comes, and he goes from the 7th heaven all the way down. So you have to go through each layer, and it's in detail as he goes through, and he disguises himself because he has to go through the layers of angels, and he doesn't want to be noticed for who he is, right? God Most High. So he disguises himself and goes all the way down, becomes incarnate with Mary, spends time with Joseph there. Joseph doesn't spend time with Mary for 2 months, doesn't touch her, nothing like that. And then Jesus just appears. There's no labor pains. There's nothing like that. Just boom, there he is. She goes through pregnancy, but she doesn't go through any of the actual birth pains, or maybe even not even birth. He's just there. And then it talks about his death, his resurrection, his ascension, and he goes all the way back up one by one through the entire thing and sits at the right hand of God the Father Almighty on high, and on the left side is the Holy Spirit. So a relatively clear Trinitarian idea, maybe not as much as we get by the 4th century, but at least the beginnings of some sort of Trinity, which we never see in the Bible itself. We could do a whole other thing on that, but the Trinity is not in the Bible. That's a good and necessary consequence, as Westminster says. I'm not sure it's good and necessary, but whatever. It's part of it anyway. And that ends the vision. And then that's when they saw Isaiah in 2. So that's how he dies. So that's the martyrdom of Isaiah. In case you were wondering, we have no idea whether it's accurate. Remember, all these stories are probably not historically accurate. They're just giving you ideas way after the fact, hundreds of years, maybe as much as 1,000 years after the fact of when Isaiah would have lived. All right, so there's that one. Any questions that I won't know the answers to? I'm only trying to tell you the fun parts of the stories and give you a little bit of details that have to do with canon when it shows up. All right, there's another one called the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, and whether it's Christian or Jewish is debated. Nobody knows. And it has 12 unequal parts. It's called the 12 Patriarchs, right? Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. Each patriarch, Judah, Joseph, Benjamin, Reuben, Levi, all these brothers of Israel, they're all going to tell a story, some of them longer, some of them not, all of them on their deathbed, except for one, I think, is not on his deathbed. And it's just their testament. It's basically saying, here's how we failed, here's how we succeeded, here's what we did right, and righteousness is always according to the Hebrew scriptures, the ethics mentioned in Sinai, the law, and here's where we didn't. And it always, I think always, but whatever, pretty much always, is comparing each of the men to their brother Joseph. So anytime it talks about, Reuben's failure with Bilhah, the concubine, his rape is really what it was, but whatever, drunken rape, we'll just call it his sexual encounter. He's going to own that, and it's going to always be compared to Joseph. And when we get to Joseph's passage, it'll tell you great details about how Joseph deals with Potiphar's wife. That's really the whole central thing. So a lot of it has to do with sexual corruption, right? That Joseph stays pure. He does not give in. And it goes into great detail with Potiphar's wife, tells how she tries to seduce him, threaten him, trick him, how she tries to kill her husband, all these different things that don't all show up in our Genesis 36 and on text. So, and it'll go through, it'll talk about Simeon. Simeon's problem was wanting to kill Joseph due to jealousy. Levi was arrogance. That was his main thing. Judah is about courage, greed, and fornication. Of course, it's always going to be sexual. And Judah, interestingly, emphasizes the priesthood. This might not be interesting to you. It's super interesting to me. He emphasizes how important the priesthood is, which might tell us something about who's writing this, because Judah himself, in Genesis, that's where the scepter is going to come from. So if this is Christian, they definitely want the scepter to come from Judah, and the kingship is more important than the priesthood, maybe, but he emphasizes the priesthood in this. So anyway, yeah, there's a bunch of prophecies in here. There's a bunch of texts that sound very much like our Gospels, and I wrote a list of them, but I don't want to take the time to walk through each one of them. But here's one that I wrote down. This is in Levi. It says, the heavens shall be opened, and from the temple of glory shall come upon him sanctification, with the Father's voice as from Abraham to Isaac. Okay, so heaven's opening, temple glory comes upon him, and his sanctification or his holiness. Father is speaking, and the glory of the Most High shall be uttered over him, and the spirit of understanding and sanctification shall rest upon him in the water. Does that sound familiar to any text that you know from the Gospels? Where the heaven opens and there's a voice speaking and he's in the waters. Do I need to be more specific?
Yes, my beloved son.
Yes. So it's Matthew. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was open. He saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and lighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, this is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. So there are no locusts. No, there are not, Travis. Although maybe there were in the earlier one, which is apocalyptic. So this is a lot. There are little pieces of apocalyptic stuff in here. Levi especially is apocalyptic, but the others not as much. So yeah, all right. So there you go. Testament of the 12, Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. Neither of those were my favorites, Martyrdom of Isaiah or 12 Patriarchs. My favorites are still Enoch, Jubilee, and Pseudo-Philo. Oh, Travis, that's what you were going to do. Pseudo-Philo, right? Biblical Antiquities. Oh, man, we're not going to talk about that. All right. That's okay. It's super fun. You guys should all read Pseudo-Philo. But now David might have gotten enough stall time, and he can tell us about Sibylline. Sybil.
I have,
weird,
but I'm gonna put you in suspense and go to Baruch first.
Ooh,
is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So I had second and third Baruch, and then Sibylline after that. So second and third Baruch are they're claimed to be written by Baruch, who was the scribe of Jeremiah, but these describe him as being a prophet in his own right. Let me find this. So it has a style similar to the writings attributed to Jeremiah, mix of prayer, lamentation, and visions. Although Baruch writes of Nebuchadnezzar's sack of Jerusalem in 586 BC, the book is currently believed to have been written in reaction to the fall of Jerusalem in 70 CE, but written before 135 CE. It seems like he's writing about the fall of the second temple, but like by putting it in words as if it were the first temple.
Okay, cool. Also, which makes Scripture does on a pretty consistent basis. They take a current event and they talk about something from much earlier. They tell you this story here, but they take like numbers or theologies or different things from this current story and they stick it in here.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's in part of it, if I remember correctly, he talks about like in part of his vision, God or an angel telling him they don't need to rebuild the temple because and so like if this is written as after the second temple fell, then I guess they're saying the same thing about second temple. I don't know. Okay, so it's broken into two parts. Second book is broken into two parts. So the first is called the Apocalypse of Baruch, and the second is the letter of Baruch to the 9.5 tribes. They think they were probably separate documents first, and then they got combined later. But the Apocalypse of Baruch, it was really interesting I listened to all these. It was interesting to listen to because the language was just so similar to what we heard in Revelation, like just the cadence of it and the style. It was very, very interesting. He says I Baruch a lot. So I don't know, like, as I was listening to it, like it's all over the place, and then I Baruch. And so I don't know if he's trying to like compensate for like not actually being Baruch, but but they says that a lot. And then the other interesting thing is, so he has all these visions. Let me read this one to give you a sense of like the language he's talking about. So it says, this is just one of the visions. And when I had said these things, I fell asleep there, and I saw a vision, and lo, a cloud was ascending from a very great sea, and I kept gazing upon it, and lo, it was full of waters, white and black, and there were many colors in those self-same waters, and as it were, the likeness of great lightning was seen at its summit. So that's like the language. I mean, it's very, I don't know, that was evocative to me. But then it's interesting because, he's being shown this by angels, and then at the end, they explain it all to him. So like we have all in Revelation, like you're kind of, none of it's ever interpreted. But when he has these visions, it says, nevertheless, so the angel says to him, because you have besought the Most High to reveal to you the interpretation of vision, which you've seen, I've been sent to tell you. And so he goes and explains, like, he sees these, it's very, it reminds me a lot of what we talked about with these repeating cycles throughout the Bible of exile and these visions that he had. It's just that over and over again. So it's obviously kind of harkening back to what we did talk about is seeing throughout the history of Israel of being exiled and wandering, and then asking for forgiveness and coming back, and those are these light and dark waters that he sees. But it's interesting because it just like the angel's just like, hey, so these are the ages that I'm talking about so it's like the first one was Adam and the second one was Moses, and so they just interpret it for him, which I thought was pretty nice of them.
Very helpful.
Right. There were let's see. Oh, I noticed that, like Revelation, that when he talks about the Messiah, there is talk of like the Messiah returning, and it's also very much like Revelation, where it's a triumphant, conquering Messiah. So that was interesting to me. If this is after Christ, like, I mean, I guess Revelation is the same thing, but it's still like this: he will come back and conquer all. I guess that's probably the most of it. Let's see. Yeah, there were 12 eras, and they're in like I think that either the 12th or the 13th. End times they're not necessarily described as imminent like Revelations, but he prays often that time will be sped up so that the end times will get here sooner.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's and then the letters. I don't remember much about it. It's the definitely the apocalypse part is more interesting. The main themes of the letter are hope for future reward of the present sufferance, the speeding up of the times, the constancy of Moses' covenant, and the freedom of man to follow God. Okay, so then third Baruch is also they think in that time period, written between the fall of Jerusalem to the Roman Empire in 70 and the 3rd century AD. Scholars disagree on whether it was written by a Jew or a Christian, or whether a clear distinction can even be made at that time, in that time period. It wasn't clear to me that whether or not it's supposed to be attributed, if they think it's the same person or just someone else who is writing in the style of Jeremiah. So in this, let's see, like second Baruch, this Greek apocalypse of Baruch describes the state of Jerusalem after the fact by Nebuchadnezzar in 587 BC. So it's a continuation of that. Also like second Baruch, third Baruch argues that the temple has been preserved. This is what I was thinking of. The temple has been preserved in heaven and is presented as fully functional and attended by angels. Thus, there is no need for the temple to be rebuilt on earth. So I thought it was interesting after the, destruction of the temple that they would go there with that. During the vision, he's shown various heavens, witnessing the punishment of the builders of the Tower of Strife against God. Probably it could be the Tower of Babel. A serpent of Hades who drinks from the sea. So there's all this Old Testament callbacks, I guess you could say. It also describes, which I thought was interesting, was I think it's describing the origin of the tree of life. So it started as a vine, I think, but it follows the history of this vine. And I think you talked about this in one of your classes, I think, when you were talking about the history of the tree of life and how it continued on, like after, I think this goes into that. And talks a little bit like it survived the flood. So it goes through the history of Moses and it describes it surviving the flood. And it does talk a lot about Jesus. So I have a note. I said probably not likely is trying to convince the audience that it's actually Baruch, but I don't know. Maybe they would. So all right, and then I had here's my favorite excerpt from third Baruch. Let me find it. Okay, so he sees this giant bird in one of his visions, and it's a phoenix, and he says, and it protects the earth from the heat of the sun. So this bird in the heavens and If it weren't there, then the sun would basically burn up Earth, which I thought was interesting because that's kind of, I mean, we have like the atmosphere. It's kind of interesting. But Baruch gets very obsessed with his bird. Asked him his name. He's called the Phoenix. And then he said, and I said, and what does it eat? And he said to me, the manna of heaven and the dew of earth. And I said, does the bird excrete? And he said to me, it excretes a worm, and the excrement of the worm is cinnamon, which kings and princes use. But wait, and thou shalt see the glory of God. And while it was conversing with me, there was a thunderclap, and the place was taken on which we were standing. So that's my favorite part of it.
That's awesome.
All right. Okay, so that's all for third Baruch.
Now you
All right,
said
so-
you
yeah.
said third Baruch has lots of stuff about Jesus in it. I did not remember that at all.
That's what I wrote in my notes, and I'd have to see. Let's see. So they
It's
say
been a long time since I read it.
the other scholars find significant that the old church Slavonic versions do not contain the Christian overtones of the Greek text, and conclude the extant Greek text represents a rewriting in the Christian age. So maybe
So
there's
there-
multiple versions that one
Yeah,
has
okay.
it and one doesn't.
that makes sense. What I
It
remember
did
about
say.
okay, good. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say it did say, at least with second Baruch, that they think it was like the text that they found. It's fairly recent, within the past couple of years, a couple hundred years, and they found it in Greek, but they think it was probably written in Hebrew to begin with. So
Okay. I remember that this text has a lot about a dragon, and that's what always fascinated me. The monster of the sea is in third Baruch. I remember them
yeah,
asking, like, you can't really tell whether the dragon lives in Hades or the dragon, or Hades lives within the dragon, which is an interesting way of, like, I remember him, Baruch asking God or asking Michael or asking somebody about the dragon and the size of his belly, because he's able to drink like 1 cubit of the sea. And whoever it is responds back to him and says his belly is Hades. It's the size of Hades. I was like, that's cool. Like, that's where you go. You go into the gullet of the dragon, which is
So
often
that's
used
the
in Near Eastern term, like the idea of death swallowing, the idea of the dragon swallowing up this death creature. So the gullet is always the maw of death comes up and grabs you, and this dragon can drink a cubit of the sea and is the size of Hades and all this. So that was just always fascinating to me. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's good. Like the third Baruch, I forgot this, but it's divided up into like these different heavens that he gets tours of, and so that the dragon's in the third heaven, and he said, and he showed me Hades. He's with an angel. And he showed me Hades, and its appearance was dark and abominable. And I said, who is this dragon, and who is the monster around him? And the angel said, the dragon is he who eats the bodies of those who spend their life wickedly, and he is nourished by them. And this is Hades, which itself also closely resembles them, in that it also drinks about a cubit from the sea, which does not think at all. So
That's cool. I love the dragon motif. So Rob Dalrymple and I did a whole thing on that on the dragon motif. Anyway, cool. Thanks, David. That was good.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to do
then,
sibling, or do you want to take a break and let somebody else talk for a minute?
if you want me to take a break, I can, or I can just keep going, because sibling, I'm going to need your help on.
Okay. Does anybody else have any others that need to get done? So we've got like 25 minutes. I want to make sure that everybody gets.
So I read about pseudophilo real quickly.
Oh, okay, great. You did all his research in the last 5 minutes. All right, tell us something about
I did this
Pseudophilo. Why
amazing
not?
amount of research,
Yeah.
and Pseudophilo was again written around the same time. 1 CE is the thought, although there is thoughts that it had an original Aramaic or Hebrew text. It's in Latin, but they think it was probably translated from Greek, translated from Hebrew or Aramaic, due to word structures and grammar things from the text, due to some textual criticism stuff. And basically, it tells the story of the entire Bible from creation until Saul. And it is a very interesting, as a guy, what stood out to me in my 30 seconds of research is it's a retelling of the covenantal story of Israel is like an interesting take on it, where they in the first century context, they're taking, as a big guy who likes covenant theology, the covenant that God made with Israel, that they would stand out and be a representative to Egypt. And now in Pseudo-Philo, the text changes to not just be Egypt, but to be the whole world, to broaden it. And that's probably an indicator of the cultural significance of now like the Roman world coming in. And now we need to take the covenant, not just to Egypt, but the covenant to the whole world and expanding it beyond that. So for example, they write in the story in Exodus where Moses is pleading on behalf of Israel, when God is like, I'm going to destroy these idiots for acting up. Once he takes them out of Egypt, he's like, hey, no, don't do that. Because then, what was the point of saving us to take us out into the desert and kill them? What's that going to tell Egypt? It's just going to show that you made your covenant with these people, but you're going to strike them down. Whereas in the Pseudo-Philo, instead of saying Egypt, it says any people in the whole world.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So this idea is called rewritten Bible. So in scholarly circles, you could have like little sections on giving papers on rewritten Bible. Pseudo-Philo, Jubilees, Enoch, they're dealing with actual texts that we have, like Genesis, and then they're filling in gaps. They're rewriting things. So what Travis gave you is a perfect example of rewritten, right? Now that hundreds of years have gone by, then we have someone else wants to interpret that same story for a new group of people, and Egypt has no relevance. So let's change the story a little bit and make it fit for a new group of people. So some of you remember you've taken my class in hermeneutics before, either here or in different churches, but I talk about the vocalic world, the A-E-I-O-U world, and the author's world. Remember, nothing's about the event. Like, we don't have any information on the event that took place in the Bible. All we have is the author's view of what happened, because we've got the scripture. We're not going back in a time machine. So we only have that author. But what I talk about also is the other interpreters. So that is later people during the Second Temple, or prophets later on, or whatever, New Testament people that are writing the same, that are talking about the same story, that is talking about some event, we'll assume, maybe, but they're talking about this story and they're rewriting the story for their world, which makes me wonder, does the New Testament do that? Are they okay with rewriting the story a little bit? Can Jude give us some extra things? We're going to do Jude after this, I think. But can Jude tell us stories and grab a hold of things like the Assumption of Moses or Pseudo-Philo and use those interpretations that he's comfortable with? And if they can do that, can we? Are we allowed to make those same elaborative interpretive decisions as they are? That's a big debate in scholarship, right? What are we allowed to do? Can we do the same things that the apostles did? And some people would say, well, the apostles were following a historical, grammatical. Exactly. I'm not quite so persuaded that they are. But if you think they are, then you say, well, of course we can do exactly what they do because they were doing historical, grammatical. But that they aren't, can we? All right. That's a lot of hermeneutic stuff. But that was good. Thanks, Travis. Pseudo-Philo in a nutshell. All right. I'm not going to help you too much with Sibylline because it's been a long time. I'll pull it up if I got it. But tell me something about it. I know that it's
all right.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so it's a bunch of books that are kind of smashed together. And all right, so this is what I wasn't totally clear on. So I think like the Sibylline were supposed to be like what are they called? They're not, I want to say oracle now, but it's like the people who would prophesy, and they'd be on like
The Delphic Oracle.
Of Delphi. So I think the Sibylline oracles are like, I think Sibylline is supposed to be a type of oracle. So it says pseudo-Sibylline oracles. And so 14 books and 8 fragments survive. And in addition of the 6, and they found it in the 6th or 7th century AD. Those are not to be confused with the original Sibylline books of the ancient Etruscans and Romans, which were burned by order of the Roman general. but this is good. So it said instead the text is an old pistache of Hellenistic and Roman mythology interspersed with Jewish, Gnostic, and early Christian legend. So this thing, like reading this thing, it is like so it's all over the place. It is so like, yeah, it's like the person got in a blender with like Judeo-Christian mythology and Roman mythology, and they're just like pulling stuff all over the place. And so it's interesting because like they'll be talking about, you know, the Judeo-Christian God, and then they start talking about like Zeus and like so let me read this little part I thought was representative of that. So he says, this one says, but when the threatenings of the mighty God are fulfilled, which he threatened mortals once, when in Assyrian land they built a tower, and they all spoke one language and resolved to mount aloft in the starry heaven. But on the air, the immortals straightway put a mighty force, and the winds from above cast down the great tower and stirred mortals up to wrangling with each other. Therefore, men gave to that name the city of Babylon. All right, and then, all right, then we kind of change direction. Now, when the tower fell and the tongues of men turned to all sorts of sounds, straightway all earth was filled with men, and kingdoms were divided. And then the generation 10th appeared of mortal men from the time when the flood came upon earlier men. And Kronos, who is Greek mythology, reigned, and Titan and Iapetus, and men called them best offspring of Gaia and Uranus. So like we pause the Judeo-Christian, and then we spend some time in Greek mythology.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, like these ages kind of happen where it, you know, it might be based in, and they kind of say that like it seems like the when they talk about Zeus and some of these like Pluto, it seems like sometimes they're referring to like, oh, this was a person, and you know he was just the father of this, you know, group of people, and that's why they worshipped him. And so they kind of like bring them down to being mortal, but still, you know, talk about how they were these people who were larger than life, right? So they were kind of like they're really important people, but they weren't deities. You know, clearly, since it's trying to mix these things together. All the oracles seem to have undergone a later revision, enrichment, and adaptation by editors and authors of different religions who added similar texts, all in the interest of the respective religions. So it's like, it's such a hodgepodge. The Sibylline oracles are therefore, I read that. Therefore, a pistache of Greek and Roman pagan mythology, employing motifs of Homer and Hesiod, Judeo-Christian legends such as the Garden of Eden and Noah and the Tower of Babel. So, and then there's also Gnostic and early Christian homilies and eschatological. Is it just eschatological? I don't know. That's how we spell it. Thinly veiled references to historical figures such as Alexander the Great and Cleopatra, as well as many allusions to the events of the later Roman Empire, often portraying Rome in a negative light. So yeah, it's just kind of like this. And then I highlighted this part. The contents are of the most varied character, and for the most part, certain references to peoples, kingdoms, cities, rulers, temples, etc. It is futile to attempt to read any order into their plan or any connected theme.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I felt that. It's very schizophrenic. It's all over. So
kind of feels like Sybil. Yeah. Schizophrenic, right? Lots of personalities going on in there.
I guess so. So I guess one thing that wasn't clear to me was, you know, when they talked about the Sibylline Oracle, I was confused as to whether these were multiple oracles or whether the Sibylline Oracle was like the Oracle of Delphi, and it was an individual, like one of the oracles, or supposedly.
I think you're supposed to see. So when you read that, you said there was no connection to the earlier one, to the Sibylline books that come before
Yeah,
that.
that's what it said. Yeah.
I think I would say the connection is thematic.
Okay.
And I might not know, but like, I'm not saying that the person who wrote the earlier ones has anything to do with the writing of the second one, but the concept of an oracle or a prophetess that would continue to give us information over decades, millennia even, right? There's
Mhm.
someone who's constantly there and constantly giving us this. So there's, I think you said 12, right? Is that what it was? There were 12 different
It was either 12 or
chapters or
14.
books or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, the oldest surviving ones are probably books 3 to 5. And just so I might have stated it wrong, but they said they're not to be confused with the original Sibylline books, but it doesn't seem to say that they're not,
They're
playing off
bouncing
of each other,
them.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, they're bouncing.
Oh, here we go. Okay. A collection of oracle utterances written in Greek hexameters ascribed to the Sibyls, prophetesses who utter divine revelations in a frenzied state. So I guess the Sibyls were a subset of oracles, I guess.
No, the Sibyls were the oracles in the various
Oh.
places.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, so that's synonymous.
Yes.
Okay.
So you get
Yeah, it was
it's a
interesting.
mess.
Yeah,
There's no reason
It
to
really
read
is.
it. But it does have a whole bunch of Jewish things along with Greek things, along with, I mean, it just has, like, you'll have the Tower of Babel at one point, and then Zeus will be there. And it's just,
Yeah.
it's weird.
And it's like, and I thought when I read it, I was like, oh, this is going to be like really interesting how they like try to make all this fit together, but they don't. They just throw all the pieces on the table, and then they're, they just have at it. So it's it was a bit of, I listened to this one too, and it was still a bit of a slog to listen to. So the guy who was reading it had a cool accent though, so it made it better.
That makes it worthwhile.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, that's all mine.
I got 3 more, and I can do them each in 5 minutes. Nobody else has any more, right? That they've been waiting to do. Okay. So, Pirkei Avot, I'm going to dog's breakfast. Thank you, Steve. I don't know what that means.
I think it's like the mishmash.
Oh, yes. Gotcha. All right. Got it. All right. Pirkei Avot means chapters of the fathers or ethics of the fathers. Avot, av, just means fathers. And Pirkei is that idea of chapters or ethics or sections of the fathers. And so we think it has something to do with either like the ancestors giving good advice, or maybe it's just the idea of a superlative group of advice. So the fathers aren't like the actual literal fathers, but like the father, like the biggest, the best of the advice. So it's the superlative kind of thing. And it's just a bunch of ethical things that come from a tractate of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is clearly Jewish, you know that, and it's in here. And at least some people thought maybe this should be part of our later texts, but it never was. It's filled with just groups of ethical things. So it starts off talking about like from Moses getting Sinai all the way to the Great Assembly, hundreds of years later. It gives you kind of the history in chapters 1 and 2. Chapters 3 and 4 is kind of a bunch of sayings that are attributed to famous rabbis. And then the last chapter is a bunch of sayings not attributed to anybody. That's what it is. It's just ethical statements about what they should do. I wrote, it continues the Torah's passionate concern with establishing justice, but emphasizes 3 key changes: a greater emphasis on love and peace, a devotion to book learning and rational discussion, which moves back to our Baruch chapter, and a belief in God's reward and punishment of individuals in the world to come, as well as in this world it is here. So one rabbi says it contains nutrients for the soul. So just nice little one. Here's a narrative from the story of Ahikar. Okay, Ahikar, or I don't know how to say it, but Ahiqar or Kar, something like that. I mean, it's not in English, so I'm just transliterating to help you out. Ahikar. So there's this, and it's a myth. It's about this mythical chancellor to the Assyrian kings Sennacherib and Esarhaddon. And he has a nephew who is named Nadib or Nadab, depending on what translation you're using. And he kind of adopts him, takes him in of his own, and the king agrees to give Nadib this the authority of Ahikar, so Ahikar can just retire. He's a faithful servant, and he's just to retire, and so he's going to get it. But Ahikar trains Nadib in all the best ethical ways, and there's just this long chapter of, oh my son, do this, like over and over again, just training him how to be a good person. And Nadab is not a good person. He betrays him, writes a letter in the hands of Ahikar, and then convinces the king that Ahikar wrote it, that shows his treasonous intentions. And the king is just ticked off, but it's right there. And he says, have him killed. The executioner comes, takes him away. But Ahikar had rescued the executioner sometime in the past in a similar circumstance. And so the executioner kills somebody else in the prison and tells the king that it was him. It kind of sounds, that's a Snow White story, right? We're supposed to go chop off his head, but chop off her head. Is that Snow White? I don't remember. I can picture this in my head, the guy with the axe, and he kills.
Cut out her heart, and he cuts out a deer's heart.
The heart, yeah, the deer heart. Is that Snow White? Is that story? Okay.
Yes.
That's the one that makes me think of when I read this one. And then there's a bunch of different endings. Nadab, and all the endings, he gets his due, of course. He gets tortured forever. But most of the stories are going to have something to do with the Egyptian king. Remember, Ahikar is in Assyria. He's working for Esarhaddon and Sennacherib. And Assyria at this time is a vassal under Egypt. And the Egyptian king finds out that Ahikar is gone. Ahikar was this man of great wisdom and brilliance and wit and all this stuff. And so he says, I'm gonna really put my foot down on these terrible Assyrians. And the king of Assyria is like, no, and so he wishes Ahikar was there, and then right, Ahikar appears and he faints away. It's this great story of, he had been hiding, but now he's been revealed. And of course, the executioner is okay, you brought him back. And then he goes on this quest to Egypt. Ahikar goes to Egypt. And this is where it gets really fun, because the king of Egypt wants to make sure that this guy has all the wit and brilliance of the past person, Ahikar. But he's pretending not to be Ahikar because Ahikar is dead for the Egyptian king. So he's pretending not to be, but he's also trying to show that he has the same brilliance as it. And so the king keeps asking for things from Ahikar that are impossible. He wants to build a palace in the sky. And he wants to make ropes out of and it doesn't, you don't need to know all the different things that he's doing, but he has to plan all of these things before he gets there. So he gets some eagles and he puts some kids on it. He trains them how to be up in the sky. And so when he gets to the king of Egypt, he sends up the eagles, and the kids are on the backs of the eagles and they're yelling, okay, send me up the bricks, send me the bricks. And the king's like, okay, we can't send you the bricks. Like, okay, you're witty, you're smart. And he tells some story about a horse making some noise in a country far away, and it disturbing. Had somebody go into pre-labor, and the child died or something, and he was really upset about it. And so Ahikar makes this plan to make a noise, like even just like a block away, and he can't hear that, and he proves it to him. And the king's like, you're really smart. So that's kind of the whole thing. Like, is the king is coming up with these puzzles, and Ahikar is solving them in front of him. And finally, he's like, you're really Ahikar. And yeah, he is. And it ends up really well for Assyria and all that. And so Ahikar comes back, and the king grants him all of his wishes. And one of the wishes is to torture Nadib, of course. And yeah, I think that's it. Tobit mentioned
one was
Ahikar.
that?
This is called the story of Ahikar. It's in different versions, but every single one is going to have the name of Ahikar in there. again, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing it right, but that's what it seems like. Ahikar. So yeah, all right. So that's just a fun story and not super long. And the one I wanted to end with are the Psalms of Manasseh. Sorry, no, I already gave you the Psalms of Manasseh. This is Psalm 151. So this Psalm 151 shows up in the Orthodox canon. It's part, or at least some of the Orthodox canons. And it's a pretty cool story. And I'm going to read it to you once it's been put together into a pretty consistent psalm. But the first 5 verses are separate from the last 2. It's only 7 verses, so I can read it. It'll take no time at all. But they were separate and they didn't fit together really well. So, you know how redaction criticism is, right? Somebody comes in and they edit things together and they make these 2 ideas fit. And I don't know what it looked like beforehand. Again, didn't do tons of research because I didn't think you cared that much. But in its version that I'm going to show you, it fits pretty well. It's the story of David and Goliath, but it's a psalm. So it's just him say, well, I guess the best thing I can do is read it to you. Now, it's in the Septuagint. It's not in the Masoretic text. We don't think it's Hebrew. It is ascribed to David in this particular thing. Remember, ascriptions to people aren't necessarily legit. We don't know. Like, just because if it says a psalm of David, that doesn't mean that David wrote the psalm, just FYI. It might mean that it's attributed to David. That is, he actually did write it. It might mean that someone else is giving honor to him, like it's a psalm in the way that David might do it. There's all kinds of different things that it could be. It might have nothing to do with that. It might even be a different David. We don't know what it is. But this one is like the David that we know of from David and Goliath. That's who it's claiming to be from. Let's see. It was found in 2 parts. I told you that in 11Q5. Anytime you see numbers with a Q in the middle of it, that's Dead Sea Scrolls talk. So 11Q5 means it comes from the 11th cave. You know, it's that kind of, that's how it's all works together there. So like 11Q milk, MELCH, is from the 11th cave of Qumran, and it's the Melchizedek scroll. So something like that. That's how they do all this. And it dates to the 1st century. And the first 5 verses are 151a. The second 2 verses are 158 with 151b. And they brought them together and changed the meaning and the structure in order to do it. So here it is. So kind of a nice little ending to our time. I was small. Oh, by the way, they use a lot, because it's so late, a lot of the Orthodox Church, the reason that they keep it in the canon is because they see it as a metaphor for Christ's death and resurrection, or death, and like him conquering evil. It's an atonement kind of thing, his defeat of Satan, which kind of makes sense, right? So if I were to preach David and Goliath, I could maybe go there, just like this interpreter does. He kind of goes in that direction, it seems like, or other people do anyway. I was small among my brothers and the youngest in my father's house. I tended my father's sheep. My hands made a harp, my fingers fashioned a lyre. Remember, we're singing this in Israel's time. And who will tell my Lord? The Lord himself. It is he who hears. It was he who sent his messenger and took me from my father's sheep and anointed me with his anointing oil. My brothers were handsome and tall, but the Lord was not pleased with them. That's 151a. It stops right there. The Lord was not pleased. So it's all the anointing up to the spot. And then all of a sudden, verse 6, I went out to meet the Philistine, and he cursed me by his idols. But I drew his own sword, I beheaded him, and took away disgrace from the people of Israel. That's it. So it's this praise of the defeat of evil in the life of David, or in his people. He was the smallest among the people. He made harps and lyres, and he killed Goliath. And the Orthodox say this is about the destruction of Satan. That's the reason that they keep it in there. And it fits. I mean, if I found it in my Bible, I'd be fine. I don't know why it would be bad. I went out to meet the Philistine. He cursed me by his idols. I drew his own sword. I beheaded him, took away his disgrace from the people of Israel. Which, by the way, is a great story. Those of you who are listening to Bible Project at all, there's a whole section in there just from a few weeks ago, I think, of this beheading and how the beheading is the crushing of the serpent, how that kind of idea fits in there. So even the David and Goliath is a dragon or snake theme. Dragon and snake theme is the same thing, by the way. Just, a lizard thing. That is
scaly armor.
That's right, scaly armor. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's got the scales there. Yeah. So anyway, there you go. That is the Pseudepigrapha. Now you can use that word with some knowledge at parties, and people will be attracted to you. That has come up right away. Just say Pseudepigrapha. These are party words, and you know a bunch of them. There are more. There's lots more. Okay, this particular one I have in front of me is the 54 book Apocrypha. I grabbed it as I was running out. I didn't bring my whole Pseudepigrapha, but there are hundreds of different books in here. I only listed 18, and we didn't even talk about all of those. We didn't talk about the fragment from Zadokite, I don't think. We talked about Pseudophilo, but barely. I don't know. We did talk about Psalms of Solomon, right? I think someone did that. Maybe Josh did that last time. I can't remember. Someone did it. So we've done most of those 18. We might have missed a couple. But next week, we want to talk about the New Testament. All right, so that's the plan. We're going to jump into the New Testament a little bit. We're going to say why certain books. So this will be, remember our cult from like 4 or 5 weeks ago, where we looked at the Bible and we got rid of as many books as we wanted to for different reasons. We're now going to do that with the New Testament. We're going to get rid of books that we don't like very much. So Luther didn't like James, so he moved it aside, right? Hebrews didn't have an author, so you move it aside. But those are just a couple of them. What reasons will you have to get rid of books? That's the question. So we'll talk about that next week. So come and tell me all the reasons that you hate certain books of the Bible and you think we should get rid of them. And we will add that to our cult. I think Mary Gonzalez called it the ditch cult, the ditch religion. No, that wasn't Mary. Somebody called it the ditch. I don't remember. It was Brian. I don't know. One of you brilliant people.
Brian.
Anyway. All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. It's 9:15. Enjoy your whatever you're doing. I don't know what you're doing. It's 9:15. Go to bed. For crying out
See y'all
loud.
next week. Sorry for the hiccup.
Yeah. Travis, you don't get to go to
Good
bed.
night. Enjoy the beach with your family.
Thank you. Have fun at the beach. Have fun with your family and at the beach. Bye-bye.